The moment people decide who deserves respect before learning the truth is the moment justice begins to disappear. On a cool autumn evening in Washington, District of Columbia, the city's most exclusive restaurant glowed beneath rows of warm amber lights that spilled across polished stone sidewalks and neatly trimmed hedges. Luxury sedans arrived one after another as business executives, diplomats, judges, and prominent community leaders quietly entered through elegant glass doors. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected across marble floors, while the soft sound of piano music drifted through conversations spoken in careful whispers. It was the kind of place where reputation seemed as valuable as the meal itself, where every tailored jacket and evening dress appeared to tell a story before anyone even spoke. Yet appearances have always been unreliable witnesses. Standing near the entrance was Officer Ethan Walker, a 38-year-old white patrol officer temporarily assigned to assist with crowd management after a nearby charity gala. He believed experience had taught him to read people in seconds. Confidence had slowly become certainty, and certainty had quietly become judgment. Throughout his career, he had convinced himself that hesitation was weakness and that questioning his first impression only wasted valuable time. Across the street, a black sedan stopped without attracting attention. The woman who stepped onto the sidewalk did not arrive surrounded by flashing lights or public ceremony. She carried no visible symbol of authority, only a simple navy coat draped over a tailored charcoal suit. Her silver earrings reflected the city lights for a brief moment before disappearing beneath neatly styled curls. At 56 years old, Vivian Brooks walked with calm confidence earned through decades of discipline rather than public recognition. To strangers, she looked like another accomplished professional enjoying dinner after a demanding day. She smiled politely at the valet before thanking him with genuine warmth, then adjusted the leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm. Nothing about her appearance suggested she expected special treatment. She simply appreciated quiet places where thoughtful conversations could continue long after the workday ended. As Vivian approached the entrance, Ethan noticed her from several yards away. His eyes lingered just long enough for assumptions to begin replacing observation. Without asking a single question, he convinced himself something did not belong. Nearby guests continued entering without interruption while restaurant staff welcomed familiar faces with practiced smiles. Vivian waited patiently for a family with young children to enter before taking another step toward the door. She acknowledged the hostess with a gentle nod, expecting nothing more than a pleasant evening. Instead, Ethan stepped directly into her path. The cheerful sounds inside the restaurant suddenly seemed much farther away. Conversations near the entrance softened as curious eyes drifted toward the unexpected encounter. The hostess hesitated. A waiter carrying sparkling water slowed almost instinctively. Even the valet glanced toward the doorway before looking away again. Vivian remained composed, her expression neither fearful nor offended. She simply met the officer's eyes with remarkable calm, the quiet confidence of someone who understood that character is tested most clearly when respect is withheld. Ethan believed he was about to control an ordinary situation. He had absolutely no idea that everyone inside the restaurant was only moments away from witnessing a decision that would change far more than one evening. Vivian Brooks did not step back. She did not raise her voice, demand attention, or remind anyone of her accomplishments. Instead, she offered the hostess the same courteous smile she had worn since arriving and waited with remarkable patience. The silence unsettled everyone far more than an argument ever could. Officer Ethan Walker folded his arms across his chest and spoke with the confidence of someone convinced he was protecting order rather than creating discomfort. He informed her that the restaurant was hosting private guests and suggested she find another place to eat. His words were measured, yet the assumptions behind them echoed loudly enough for nearby diners to exchange uncertain glances. Vivian answered in an even tone that she had a confirmed reservation under her own name and simply wished to enjoy dinner after a demanding day. The hostess nervously checked the reservation tablet again, her eyes widening for a brief second before Ethan interrupted, insisting there must be some mistake. The young employee hesitated between the authority of the uniform and the information glowing on the screen. She quietly explained that the reservation appeared valid, but Ethan remained unconvinced. Several guests paused near the entrance, pretending to study the wine display while carefully listening. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A retired couple stopped their conversation. Even the pianist inside seemed to soften his melody as the atmosphere shifted from elegant to uncomfortable. Vivian noticed every curious glance, but refused to let embarrassment dictate her behavior. Years of public service had taught her that composure often revealed more truth than outrage ever could. She gently thanked the hostess for checking the reservation and calmly repeated that she was willing to wait while everything was verified. Her steady voice contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding the entrance. Ethan interpreted her calmness as resistance. The certainty that had guided countless decisions throughout his career became stronger with every passing second. He believed confidence without explanation meant someone was hiding something. Rather than asking additional questions or requesting assistance from restaurant management, he relied entirely on his first impression. The manager finally approached from the dining room, wearing the practiced smile of someone determined to preserve a peaceful evening for every guest. He greeted Vivian respectfully and apologized for the unexpected delay before attempting to escort her toward the reserved table. Ethan immediately stepped between them and insisted that no one enter until he was satisfied that everything was in order. The manager looked confused, explaining that the reservation had been confirmed earlier that afternoon through the restaurant's executive office. Vivian quietly assured him there was no need to rush and that misunderstandings could always be resolved with patience. Her kindness only deepened the discomfort felt by those watching. One customer discreetly placed a phone back into a pocket after considering whether to record the encounter. Another whispered that the woman seemed far too composed to be causing any trouble. The valet recognized the expensive government vehicle that had dropped Vivian off only minutes earlier, yet he hesitated to interrupt an officer performing what appeared to be official duties. Unknown to everyone gathered near the entrance, two individuals seated separately inside the restaurant had already exchanged subtle glances after noticing the delay. Neither stood up. Neither spoke. They simply observed with careful attention, their calm expressions revealing nothing while every passing second quietly moved the evening toward a revelation that none of the guests, and certainly not Officer Ethan Walker, could possibly anticipate. The restaurant manager took a careful breath before trying once again to restore the peaceful atmosphere that had existed only minutes earlier. He politely explained that every reservation in the executive dining room was confirmed several times before arrival and that Ms. Brooks had personally been welcomed as an honored guest by the reservation staff earlier that afternoon. Officer Ethan Walker listened without changing his expression. To him, confidence from others only strengthened his own determination to remain in control of the situation. He believed that allowing one exception would undermine his authority, even though no evidence suggested that Vivian Brooks had violated a single rule. Vivian remained remarkably composed. She thanked the manager for his professionalism and quietly suggested that everyone take a moment to verify whatever information was necessary. Her voice carried neither frustration nor sarcasm. Instead, it reflected the calm discipline of someone who had spent decades making decisions where patience mattered more than emotion. The guests nearest the entrance began exchanging uncertain looks. A middle-aged attorney recognized something familiar about Vivian's face, but could not immediately place where he had seen her before. A law student seated with her parents whispered that the woman carried herself like someone accustomed to courtrooms rather than restaurants. Across the dining room, the two quiet observers who had remained seated since Vivian's arrival continued watching without drawing attention to themselves. They spoke only briefly into discreet communication devices before returning their attention to the entrance. Their movements were subtle enough that almost no one noticed, yet their eyes never drifted far from Vivian Brooks. Outside, another dark government vehicle rolled slowly past the restaurant before continuing down the street without stopping. Ethan noticed the vehicle only for a moment before dismissing it as unrelated. His focus remained entirely on the woman standing calmly before him. He asked again for identification, his tone firm but increasingly impatient. Vivian looked at him steadily for several seconds before reaching into her leather portfolio with slow, deliberate movements that left no room for misunderstanding. Instead of immediately presenting anything, she paused and gently closed the portfolio once more. She smiled politely and said that there would soon be people who could answer every question far more clearly than she ever could. The sentence puzzled nearly everyone standing nearby. It was not a challenge. It was not a warning. It sounded almost compassionate. Ethan interpreted it differently. Convinced that she was avoiding a direct answer, he stepped slightly closer and informed her that continued refusal to cooperate could create unnecessary complications. The manager quietly attempted to intervene again, reminding everyone that this disagreement could easily be resolved through simple verification. Vivian nodded in agreement and thanked him once more for his kindness. She appeared completely unhurried, as though she already knew exactly how the evening would unfold. Then, from somewhere beyond the restaurant entrance, the soft sound of multiple vehicle doors opening echoed across the quiet street. Several guests instinctively turned toward the windows. The valet straightened his posture. The hostess looked outside with growing curiosity. Even Ethan briefly glanced toward the entrance before returning his attention to Vivian, unaware that the ordinary evening he believed he controlled had just reached the point where every assumption he had made would soon be tested by a truth much larger than himself. The quiet murmur inside the restaurant faded until even the soft piano music seemed distant beneath the growing anticipation. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, 3 dark government sport utility vehicles came to a smooth stop along the curb with remarkable precision. No emergency lights flashed. No sirens disturbed the evening. Everything about the arrival reflected discipline rather than spectacle. The valet instinctively stepped aside while several professionally dressed individuals exited the vehicles with calm purpose. Their movements were measured, their expressions composed, and their attention remained fixed on the restaurant entrance. The hostess glanced toward the manager, who suddenly recognized that something far more significant than a reservation dispute was unfolding before everyone present. Officer Ethan Walker noticed the arriving group and straightened his posture. His training immediately told him they were security professionals, although their conservative suits revealed little about whom they represented. Assuming they had arrived in response to the situation, he remained convinced that his decisions would soon be confirmed. Vivian Brooks did not turn around. She simply stood where she was, one hand resting lightly on her leather portfolio while the other remained relaxed at her side. There was no satisfaction on her face, no trace of triumph, only the same quiet patience she had displayed since the moment she arrived. The first member of the security detail entered through the revolving door with calm confidence. He briefly surveyed the entrance before making respectful eye contact with Vivian. Without hesitation, he offered a polite nod and said, "Good evening, Justice Brooks. We apologize for the unexpected delay." The words settled over the room like complete silence. Every conversation stopped. Glasses remained suspended halfway to lips. The attorney near the entrance suddenly remembered exactly where he had seen Vivian's face before, not in person, but during nationally televised judicial opinions and official portraits. The law student stared in disbelief, realizing she was standing only a few feet from one of the most respected legal minds in the country. The manager quietly lowered his head, understanding that his honored guest had shown extraordinary grace throughout the entire encounter. Ethan's expression changed for the first time that evening. His confidence gave way to uncertainty as he looked from Vivian to the security professional and back again. Before he could respond, 2 additional members of the protective detail entered, maintaining respectful distance while remaining alert to their surroundings. None displayed hostility. None raised their voices. Their professionalism only amplified the weight of the moment. Vivian finally turned toward the officer with the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning. She thanked the security detail for arriving and gently explained that there had simply been a misunderstanding that everyone hoped could be resolved respectfully. The statement surprised nearly everyone listening. She neither accused nor embarrassed anyone. Instead, she chose language that allowed dignity to remain available to every person in the room. Yet the truth could no longer be hidden. The guests now understood why her composure had never wavered. The manager quietly instructed the staff to prepare the private dining room immediately, while several observers exchanged astonished whispers that spread through the restaurant within seconds. Ethan remained motionless, realizing that the assumptions guiding every decision he had made throughout the evening had collapsed in a single sentence. And although the room had finally learned who Vivian Brooks truly was, an even greater consequence had only just begun to unfold. For several long moments, no one seemed willing to disturb the silence that had settled across the restaurant. It was not the silence of fear, but the silence that follows the sudden collapse of certainty. Officer Ethan Walker slowly lowered his hands to his sides, replaying every decision he had made since Vivian Brooks first approached the entrance. Each confident conclusion that had seemed unquestionable only minutes earlier now felt painfully incomplete. The manager stepped forward with genuine respect and apologized once again for the delay, assuring Justice Brooks that her private dining room had been prepared exactly as requested. Vivian accepted the apology with quiet grace and thanked every employee who had remained professional despite the growing tension. She made a point of reassuring the nervous hostess that she had handled herself with remarkable kindness under difficult circumstances, and the young woman's anxious expression softened into visible relief. Around the dining room, conversations gradually resumed, but no one spoke as loudly as before. Guests who had witnessed the encounter found themselves reflecting on how easily appearances had shaped assumptions. The attorney who had finally recognized Vivian quietly admitted to the retired couple beside him that he had almost failed to recognize one of the nation's most respected jurists because he had never expected to see her outside a courtroom. The law student remained speechless, realizing she had just witnessed a lesson that no textbook could ever fully teach. Meanwhile, the leader of the protective detail spoke briefly with the restaurant manager before confirming that everything was secure and that no further assistance was required. Their professionalism never shifted toward confrontation. They neither criticized nor challenged anyone. Their presence alone reminded everyone that genuine authority rarely needed to announce itself loudly. Ethan finally cleared his throat and addressed Vivian directly. His voice no longer carried the certainty that had defined the beginning of the evening. Instead, it reflected someone beginning to understand the weight of first impressions made without complete information. He acknowledged that the situation had not unfolded as it should have and admitted that he had acted before taking the time to verify the facts presented to him. Vivian listened without interrupting. She did not celebrate the moment or seek to prolong his discomfort. After a thoughtful pause, she answered with the same calm dignity she had demonstrated from the very beginning. She explained that every public servant, regardless of title or position, carries the responsibility to slow down before reaching conclusions because the people standing in front of them are more than appearances, assumptions, or passing impressions. Her words were measured, thoughtful, and free from anger. The manager quietly invited Justice Brooks toward the private dining room, but before following him, she turned once more toward the entrance, where several guests still watched with quiet curiosity. She smiled gently, thanked everyone for their patience, and wished them a pleasant evening. As she disappeared deeper into the restaurant, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal, yet something fundamental had changed. The elegant dining room no longer felt like a place defined by status or reputation alone. Instead, it had become the setting for a powerful reminder that respect should never depend upon recognition, and that the most important judgments are often the ones made before anyone knows exactly who is standing in front of them. The following morning, long before the city reached its usual rhythm, the events at the restaurant had already begun moving through the proper administrative channels. No dramatic headlines had appeared overnight, and no sensational rumors had spread across social media. Instead, the process unfolded the way Justice Vivian Brooks believed accountability should always unfold, quietly, carefully, and according to established procedures. Inside the Metropolitan Police Department headquarters, supervisors reviewed routine reports from the previous evening while internal documentation from special assignments arrived through standard reporting systems. Officer Ethan Walker sat at his desk, attempting to focus on ordinary paperwork, but his thoughts repeatedly returned to the restaurant entrance. The confidence that had guided him for years had been replaced by an uncomfortable question he could no longer ignore. Had he truly evaluated the situation fairly, or had he relied on assumptions before facts had a chance to speak? Several coworkers noticed that he seemed unusually quiet, though none knew exactly why. Meanwhile, Justice Brooks arrived at the Supreme Court building shortly after sunrise. She greeted security officers by name, thanked administrative staff for their dedication, and continued through the familiar marble corridors with the same calm professionalism she displayed every working day. She never mentioned the previous evening unless directly asked, and even then she described it simply as an unfortunate misunderstanding that deserved thoughtful review rather than emotional reaction. During a scheduled meeting later that morning, one of her colleagues commented that public confidence in the justice system depended not only upon court decisions, but also upon the everyday conduct of every public servant. Vivian listened carefully before responding that fairness begins long before a courtroom opens, because every citizen deserves equal dignity during ordinary moments of life. Across town, the restaurant manager voluntarily submitted written statements describing exactly what had occurred, while several employees independently documented their observations with remarkable consistency. The hostess carefully explained that the reservation had been confirmed from the beginning. The valet described the respectful manner in which Vivian had arrived. Guests who had witnessed the encounter provided balanced accounts focused on facts rather than emotion. None exaggerated. None attempted to assign motives they could not prove. Together, their statements formed a complete timeline built upon observation instead of assumption. By late afternoon, Ethan received notice that supervisors wished to discuss the incident as part of a routine professional review. The message was brief, respectful, and procedural. Walking toward the conference room, he realized that this meeting was not simply about one evening outside an elegant restaurant. It represented an opportunity to examine decisions that every officer might eventually face. Inside the room, experienced supervisors emphasized that public trust depends upon patience, verification, and equal treatment for every person, regardless of appearance, occupation, or social standing. They reminded everyone present that authority earns lasting respect only when it is exercised with humility and discipline. Ethan listened more carefully than ever before. For the first time in many years, he understood that the greatest lesson of his career would not come from enforcing the law alone, but from learning that justice begins with the willingness to see the individual before forming the conclusion. Outside, the city continued its ordinary routine. Unaware that a quiet conversation inside one conference room had already begun changing the future of one officer and reinforcing the principles that Justice Vivian Brooks had spent an entire lifetime protecting. Several weeks passed, yet the evening outside the restaurant continued to shape conversations inside places far removed from polished dining rooms and marble court buildings. At the police academy, instructors quietly incorporated the incident into leadership discussions without focusing on names or personal criticism. Recruits were presented with a simple question instead. What happens when certainty arrives before understanding? The room often fell silent because every future officer recognized how easily confidence could become assumption if left unexamined. Officer Ethan Walker attended additional professional development sessions as part of the department's commitment to continuous improvement. Rather than treating the experience as punishment alone, senior supervisors encouraged honest reflection. They reminded every officer that public trust is not built during dramatic emergencies, but during ordinary encounters with ordinary people. Every greeting, every conversation, and every decision either strengthens or weakens that trust. Ethan found himself listening more carefully than ever before. He reviewed body camera footage from unrelated calls, paying attention not only to what officers said but also to how they listened. For the first time in years, he noticed details he had once overlooked: the hesitation before asking a question, the importance of allowing someone to explain, and the difference between authority exercised with confidence and authority exercised with humility. Across the city, Justice Vivian Brooks continued her responsibilities exactly as she always had. She participated in hearings, reviewed legal briefs, and met with colleagues to discuss matters affecting millions of Americans. Nothing about her schedule suggested she viewed herself as the central figure in a remarkable story. When a judicial clerk cautiously mentioned that many people were still discussing the restaurant incident, Vivian smiled gently and answered that lasting lessons should always be larger than the individuals involved. She explained that if people remembered only one uncomfortable evening, then very little had been accomplished. But if they remembered the importance of treating every person with dignity before learning their title, profession, or influence, then something valuable had truly been gained. Her words quietly spread throughout the courthouse, repeated not because they were dramatic, but because they were deeply practical. One afternoon, the restaurant manager received a handwritten note delivered without publicity or ceremony. Inside was a brief message from Justice Brooks thanking the staff for remaining courteous despite unexpected pressure and encouraging them to continue welcoming every guest with equal respect. The note was framed and placed inside the manager's office, where employees could read it whenever difficult situations arose. It became less a reminder of one evening and more a reminder of the standard they hoped to uphold every day. Ethan later returned to the same restaurant while off duty, not to erase the past, but to face it honestly. The hostess recognized him immediately, yet she greeted him with the same professionalism she offered every customer. The manager welcomed him politely, and for a moment Ethan understood what genuine fairness looked like. No one treated him with resentment. No one attempted to embarrass him. They simply extended the same courtesy that should have been present from the very beginning. As he quietly left after dinner, he paused outside the entrance where everything had begun. The city lights reflected across the sidewalk exactly as they had weeks before, but the person standing beneath them was no longer guided by certainty alone. He had learned that the strongest badge any public servant can carry is not worn on a uniform. It is demonstrated through patience, humility, and the willingness to see another human being before making any judgment at all. By the beginning of spring, the story had quietly traveled far beyond the courthouse, the restaurant, and the police department. It reached universities where future attorneys debated professional ethics, community meetings where neighbors discussed public trust, and leadership seminars where experienced officials reminded one another that character is often revealed during ordinary moments rather than historic ones. Justice Vivian Brooks never sought recognition for any of it. Whenever reporters attempted to ask about the evening that had drawn so much attention, she redirected every conversation toward a broader principle. She explained that the discussion should never center on one individual or one misunderstanding. Instead, it should encourage every institution to remember that fairness begins before introductions, before credentials, and before anyone learns another person's title. Those words slowly became part of conversations far beyond the legal community because they reflected something every family, teacher, employer, and public servant could understand. Officer Ethan Walker continued performing his duties under careful supervision while applying every lesson he had spent months learning. Colleagues noticed small changes long before they noticed larger ones. He asked more questions before reaching conclusions. He listened without interrupting. He greeted people with the same level of courtesy regardless of how they were dressed or where they came from. Some of the newer officers quietly began following his example without realizing why those conversations felt different. Respect had become a habit rather than a reaction. One afternoon, a routine neighborhood event brought together residents, business owners, firefighters, police officers, and local judges for a community appreciation gathering in a public park. Families enjoyed music while children played nearby beneath rows of flowering trees. Vivian attended as a guest speaker, not to discuss the previous incident, but to encourage young students interested in careers devoted to public service. Ethan happened to be assigned to the event as part of the security detail. When he noticed Justice Brooks approaching the stage, he walked forward with calm professionalism and respectfully welcomed her to the event before guiding her toward the organizers. There was no awkwardness between them, only quiet understanding built through reflection and accountability. Vivian thanked him for his professionalism, and Ethan sincerely thanked her for demonstrating patience during circumstances that could easily have unfolded differently. Their brief exchange lasted less than a minute, yet several students watching nearby later commented that genuine leadership seemed remarkably calm. No one raised a voice. No one attempted to revisit the past. Instead, both demonstrated through simple actions that dignity can remain intact even after difficult moments. As the afternoon continued, Vivian addressed the audience with a message that resonated across generations. She reminded everyone that democracy depends upon institutions, but institutions depend upon people willing to practice fairness every single day. She encouraged the young people listening never to assume that another person's worth could be measured by appearance, occupation, or reputation. Every individual deserved the opportunity to be seen clearly before being judged. The audience responded with thoughtful applause rather than excitement, because the message invited reflection instead of celebration. Standing quietly near the edge of the crowd, Ethan looked across the gathering and realized that the most meaningful victories rarely come from proving someone wrong. They come from becoming someone better than you were the day before. As the evening sun settled behind the city skyline and families slowly returned home, the lesson that had begun outside one restaurant had grown into something far larger than either of the two people who first stood at that entrance, reminding everyone present that lasting justice is built one respectful decision at a time. Months later, the evening that had begun with quiet misunderstanding had become a case study discussed not because of a famous name or a public office, but because it reminded people how quickly assumptions can shape decisions and how deliberately those assumptions must be challenged. The restaurant continued welcoming guests from every walk of life with the same gracious professionalism that Justice Vivian Brooks had encouraged from the very beginning. The handwritten note she had sent remained framed in the manager's office, not as a reminder of one difficult evening, but as a daily commitment to treat every person with equal dignity before learning anything about their background. Officer Ethan Walker continued serving his community with a renewed understanding of responsibility. His supervisors observed consistent improvement, not through dramatic speeches or symbolic gestures, but through countless ordinary interactions. He listened longer before speaking. He verified information before reaching conclusions. He approached every citizen with the same respect, whether they wore business attire, work boots, school uniforms, or casual clothing. Those small choices slowly rebuilt confidence among the people he served, because genuine trust is rarely restored in a single moment. It is rebuilt one decision at a time. Justice Brooks never referred to herself as the central figure in the story. During a lecture at a law school, a student asked how she remained so calm during moments of public misunderstanding. She smiled thoughtfully before answering that every person eventually faces a moment when character speaks louder than credentials. Titles may open doors, she explained, but integrity determines what happens after those doors are opened. The auditorium remained silent as students carefully wrote down her words, recognizing that the lesson reached far beyond the practice of law. Years later, one of those students would recall that answer as the reason he chose to become a public defender, believing that fairness begins with seeing the humanity of every individual. On another quiet evening, Ethan happened to walk past the same restaurant after finishing his shift. He paused briefly, watching families laugh together through the large windows while couples celebrated anniversaries and friends shared ordinary conversations. The entrance looked exactly as it had before, yet he understood that he was no longer the same person who had once stood there convinced that first impressions were enough. Across the street, a black sedan slowly passed through the intersection before continuing toward the courthouse district. Ethan recognized neither the passengers nor the destination, but he smiled faintly, appreciating that some people carry extraordinary responsibility without ever asking the world to notice. He adjusted his uniform, continued down the sidewalk, and greeted a passing pedestrian with sincere warmth before disappearing into the evening crowd. Above the city, the lights of Washington glowed against the night sky, illuminating monuments built to honor ideals larger than any single individual. Somewhere beyond those lights, courtrooms would continue hearing difficult cases, officers would continue protecting neighborhoods, teachers would continue shaping young minds, and ordinary people would continue crossing paths with strangers whose stories remained unseen. The greatest measure of justice, however, would never be found only inside a courtroom. It would be found in everyday moments when someone chooses respect before recognition, fairness before assumption, and truth before judgment. Because the strongest authority is never the title someone carries. It is the character they reveal when no one yet knows who they are, and that kind of justice leaves an echo long after every conversation has ended.